Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to From Hollywood to the Heartland. It's a new premiere episode that is going to be talking about the experiences growing up in Hollywood from the people themselves, people that have worked in the industry, still have friends in the industry, can offer us insight both into acting as well as voice over work, and a plethora of stories sharing their experiences over the last several decades of their lives. So with that, I'd like to welcome Anthony Powell and Connor Quinn. Welcome, guys. Why don't you take the mic first, Connor? Tell us a little bit about what we're going to be experiencing.
Very cool. It's a pleasure to be on here with both you and Anthony. And I think this has been a journey in the making for a long time, literally since we were born and have lived most of our lives out in Los Angeles. And we now live in the heartland, as you do as well. So hence the podcast.
Yeah.
And
Well, tell us a little bit. Why are you an avatar or a cartoon versus a live feed like us?
let's get the elephant out of the room. So
Yeah.
the days that I started doing voiceover, I was always taught that a voiceover is to be heard, not seen. And so predominantly most of my career as a voiceover was based on the sound of my voice, not for what I look like. So it's just been my branding. Walt Disney did that himself when he would cast his animated movies. He would go into a room and then the actors would go into another room. So he wouldn't see them. He would just hear them. And they would be assigned numbers and he'd say, I like number 3, number 10, number 9, whatever, and they would narrow it down as opposed to basing it on how the person looked or if he knew the person or whatever. It was based solely on how they're sounding.
Yeah.
So my voice, I get a lot of roles that I probably would not get if someone saw what I look like, both old and young or whatever. Leaves that up to the listener.
Me, on the other hand,
So,
camera and a mic hog, so I like to be seen and heard.
and he's been well paid for both. I get paid to just do voiceover, and they also pay me to stay off the camera. So you see, that's how that works.
Cast me if you will. Typecasting gets a check as well. So
There you go. From
Money
Central
is
Cast.
money is always good, but I understand the anonymity. But I think it also brings a funness to this too. Anthony, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was thinking about this today. My life, exactly, it's the same as my dad, and it's different. What I mean by that is my dad was a screenwriter. I wrote for a lot of famous shows, Hogan's Heroes, Andy Griffith, Gomer Pyle, Mary Tyler Moore, Barney Miller, Charlie's Angels, Happy Days. But he went from the heartland, Cincinnati, Ohio, out to Hollywood. And here I am growing up in Malibu, and I end up in Wichita, Kansas, about 2 hours from Connor in Oklahoma City. I know, Bo, you're in Wisconsin. That's the name, the heartland in the title. So, yeah, I grew up in Malibu, California. Very unique place to grow up. Not too many people grow up there. Like I said, my dad was in show business, so a lot of showbiz people ended up in Malibu. I was always interested in showbiz. I was recalling today, I went to an elementary school and we had an opportunity to go on a well-known radio station, a 94.7 KMET. I was really well-known.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we got to talk about our school. And I just remember how much I enjoyed that. And I was always a big sports fan. I always wanted to be a sportscaster. My parents were very into current events, so I wanted to be a newscaster too. So I got my degree in broadcasting. But around the time I was getting my degree, a lot of my classmates that I went to a school with in Malibu, people like Charlie Sheen and Rob Lowe, were making it big time. And I said, I think I'm going to stick around to LA and try the acting thing. So I did a few small things. I got into Screen Actors Guild, but realized after about 5 years what a tough business it was. And then I embarked on a television news career. It took me to 6 different cities and ended up, my last job was here in Wichita, Kansas. I've stayed here. And after getting out of news, I started my own freelance voiceover on camera business. That's how I met Connor. We were both taking a marketing class in voiceover, and the guy who was teaching said, you got to get a hold of Connor Quinn. He's amazing. I called him up out of the blue, and we've been friends ever since. So,
Yep.
It's amazing. Your journey definitely adds an awesome twist to this podcast.
yeah, it's been a journey.
Connor, we didn't go a lot into your background. Give us a little bit more. So you started out as a child actor.
I did, yeah. So as a little boy of 6 years old, my very first gig was doing voiceovers for Disney. They had the Buena Vista Records had a label called Storyteller Records. That they were taking a lot of the animated films of old and putting them onto, for those that are listening in the audience that may not be familiar, we used to have records, LPs, cassette tapes, and that type of thing. So they would put them on for children to read. And it was like, you'll know it's time to turn the page when you hear Tinkerbell go like this, that type of thing.
Mhm.
So as a little boy, I did Christopher Robin for Winnie the Pooh and various other storyteller records. And quickly back then it was much more competitive for voiceover. So there was a plethora of on-camera jobs. It was much easier to try to get on camera than voiceover at the time. And like a lot of other kids, we're all young. And so I did a lot of commercials for Coke and Jello and cereal and Star Wars Kenner figures and all kinds of stuff. And then I made my way when I was about 7. I got on Little House on the Prairie as a background extra player, basically. Had very little lines, but I was on a lot of episodes. So anytime they would needed children in the school playground playing or in the church or stuff, we were always having to go up to the Simi Valley back then it was filmed at the Big Sky Ranch, which is in the Simi Valley north of Los Angeles. We'd have to get up really early in the morning and drive all day. It seemed to a kid, it seemed that way. But, and then there, I split time as a kid. Half the year would be in LA filming for Little House on the Prairie. And then the other half of the year would be shooting in Manhattan for Sesame Street. And I was on there for 5 or 6 years. So I did a lot of that. And then about the time you get teenager, you get awkward looking. I wasn't. And so my agent, she was like, you've got to make the transition to doing voiceover. I think that's how you can have longevity. And so I was about 16. Yeah, 16, 1987, and started going full-time voiceover behind the microphone. And I found my tribe. I enjoyed doing the on-camera. I enjoyed all the experiences and being on TV and all that sort of thing, but nothing thrilled me and thrills me as much as doing voiceover. So I found my calling, and here I have stayed. And a couple of years ago, I moved back, and more than that, it's probably been about 10 years. I moved back to Oklahoma. My parents were in bad health and wanted to take care of them, and just loved it out here. I would visit out here because they're from Oklahoma. So I'd visit as a child, and it's such a different pace of life as opposed to LA. And I fell in love with it. So
that's one of the reasons I love the title of our podcast, From Hollywood to the Heartland, because you wouldn't think that people would move away from Los Angeles to live in a place like Wichita, Kansas, or Oklahoma City. But I was doing a story today for a local PBS show that I freelance for. And it was quite a drive. It was a relaxing drive because there was so much open farmland. It was like being in the 1950s. That's why I really like living here, because it's a simpler way of life. I've lived in 6 cities because of television news, and I've just really gotten used to smaller living. I got to go to Dallas sometimes for work, and I got to tell you, I find bigger cities a little bit overwhelming now because, like I said, I've lived in such smaller towns. I think it's just really unique that Connor and we spent all this time around up in places like Oklahoma and Kansas.
The exciting part for me is that between the way that both of you grew up, it touched the lives of many of our most recognized figures in entertainment, and the stories that come along with, not only in the sense of the storytelling itself, but the way that it actually individually touched your lives and shape them. There's stories that we'll share on future casts, everything from Michael Landon to Michael Jackson to, there's so many great, amazing people that have come along your paths within your own right. Looking back, that has to be sometimes you pinch yourself, don't you?
For me, growing up in Malibu, I didn't know anything different. I thought this is the way most people live. But I spent my summers in northern Michigan because my dad was from Ohio. And a lot of people from Ohio found this little area up in northern Michigan by Mackinac Island. A lot of people know Mackinac Island. So when I would go back in the summers, that's when I started realizing that where I grew up was atypical, because people were absolutely fascinated by the work that my dad did. And that's when I started realizing how important certain shows were to people. They would just see Hollywood through their TVs, but actually knowing somebody that was living that life, they were really enamored with it. So that's when I started figuring out that this was not a typical upbringing. And now when I look back on my life, I was like, wow, that was pretty amazing to grow up like that. Pretty fortunate. I mean, like I said, I grew up on the beach in Malibu. We took it for granted back then. My mom used to yell at my brother and me, when are you going to use the beach? And here we were, could literally walk down the stairs to the beach. Yeah, looking back on it, pretty amazing.
I like that we're bringing the humanity, showing that you're still just like everybody else.
My mom used to yell at my brother and me, when are you going to use the beach? And here we were, could literally walk down the stairs to the beach. Yeah, looking back on it, pretty amazing.
I like that we're bringing the humanity, showing that you're still just like everybody else. Relate to people on a different level than what you just see on TV is nice. And it brings a certain humanity to a public face, which is always a pleasure.
Yeah. And now when I look back on my life, I was like, wow, that was pretty amazing to grow up like that. Pretty fortunate. I mean, like I said, I grew up on the beach in Malibu. We took it for granted back then. My mom used to yell at my brother and me, when are you going to use the beach? And here we were, could literally walk down the stairs to the beach. Yeah, looking back on it, pretty amazing.
I like that we're bringing the humanity, showing that you're still just like everybody else. Being able to actually relate to people at a different level than what you just see on TV is nice. And it brings a certain humanity to a public face, which is always a pleasure.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I could be starstruck even growing up out there. Certain people, like for me, it was athletes in particular, because I was so into sports. But by and large, like I said, you were so surrounded by people in the industry, they just seem to mesh in anybody else.
So let's give some insights to what we're bringing to the table with this new podcast. What can people look forward to tuning into in the future? What can we do to hook them a little bit so that they come back and visit us?
I think anybody that has ever dreamed of going to Hollywood or having a career in entertainment, and so much of these younger generations are definitely right down there, the influencers, and they're wanting to do the TikTok videos and the YouTube vlogging and that type of thing. I think, like what you said earlier, bringing the humanity to what we've done was just, I didn't choose how I grew up, and neither did Anthony, but we were hit the lottery as far as having the right parents at the right time. And it was my mom who made the decision to put me at an early age into the career. But it was me that decided to take it further. I really got hooked and wanted to stay on to it. So I think that for someone listening that has ever dreamed of whatever their dream is, whether it's going to Hollywood or maybe it's to start their own company, whatever their journey is that it is possible, regardless of your place of birth or the luckiness or unluckiness of your birth. There's so many stories of great success. We're just representing the entertainment aspect. Think of how many great stories there were. You go into science, how many great, wonderful minds are out there that may have not started in the right place or the right time, but they made that happen. And they're able to change humanity because of. So I think we can help inspire, just tell people that it is normal people that are making great things or doing things, following your passions. It's such a journey, and it's hard to stay with that when there's so many things telling us no or give up and not to. I know for myself, there was plenty of times in my career that I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go get a normal job. Maybe that's what I need to do. But I didn't. I stuck it out, and I'm glad that I did.
Anthony, how about you?
Well said. I think we've got a great mixture for a variety of people. I think we could spend hours on the stories of growing up, who we knew. For example, I've told you both about, I was very young, but I remember a cast party of Hogan's Heroes at our house. I remember John Banner, Sergeant Schultz, because he was such a man. I can still see him in our living room. I went to school with people like Charlie Sheen, Rob Lowe, trick-or-treating at Mary Tyler Moore's house. A lot of playing tennis with Rod Steiger. A lot of stories that people would find fascinating. And I think I can also talk a lot about my news career. Anybody who might be interested in a television news career, I can give the bad and the ugly about that business. And I have some incredible stories from being in that long. And then I think Connor and I really want to spend considerable time, and we talked about even taking calls from people about the voiceover business, because there's this conception out there. We hear it all the time. People will say, oh, people have always told me I have a great voice, but that's about 1/1,000,000th of what it takes to make
Right.
it. There are so many layers. He and I talk almost daily about the intricacies of the voiceover business, whether it be technical issues, whether it be trying to get with this agent. And I can also talk about my on-camera experiences, doing auditions. Like I said, I'm a couple hours from Oklahoma City. They're filming a lot of movies in Oklahoma, so I've had some parts in movies down there. So I've come full circle, starting with the acting in LA and then giving it up for the news and then coming back to the acting.
What really rings true to me is this diversification that both of you have instituted in your own careers. I think a story that comes to mind, Connor, that you might like to share is the Michael Landon story. I found that inspiring when you and I were talking that early on, and you shared that story. I was like, man, that's so dead on. Tell us that story.
Yeah, for Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon was the patriarch on the show, and also for the set. He set the day because he was an executive producer, he was a writer, he was a director, he was the actor. So a lot of us kids looked up to him because he was basically our father on the set. In those days, if we filmed at the NBC or wherever we were filming a TV show, it was just pure mayhem. Parents would drop off the kids and you had 8-year-old boys smoking, just insane. But not on Michael Landon's set, because he'd been a child actor. So he knew what kind of mayhem could happen. And he was a teen pinup guy, basically. So he'd been a teen hunk, so to speak. He'd gone through that phase. When it came to his set, he wasn't putting up with any of that. So if we were not on the set blocking and rehearsing lines for the camera, we were offset either rehearsing or we were with our California state-appointed tutor, set tutor, studying history or whatever. And as a child, I hated that. I liked the craziness of doing whatever. But as an adult now, I'm grateful that he was the parent. He put his foot down and said, this is, because we weren't in Glendale or Burbank or wherever. We were a long way north of LA, and we didn't even have restrooms. Everything was outdoors. It was like camping, basically. It was, we didn't videotape, we filmed. So it was a long process, and he would get in 10 scenes a day. That's how much we would shoot. Very fast, it was almost like a factory. So all that being said, he was so gregarious and funny and just had great charisma. And I, as a kid, just loved being around him and hearing his stories and hearing his jokes. And I thought everything he did was funny. And one day he gathered all of us kids up. We're talking the stars. Me and some of the other guys, we're just background fodder. We're not, we're no names. But he gathered all of us kids up, and that includes the stars like Melissa Gilbert. And we gathered us all around, and we usually ate lunch under these oak trees outdoors on like picnic tables. That's where we would have our craft services and that sort of thing. He gathered us all up and he was looking around. He's, yeah, no, I don't see any Paul Newmans here. I don't see any James Deans or Liz Taylors. And he's looking at all of us. And he goes, yeah, unfortunately, all of you are going to grow up to be big, fat, ugly, and probably bald. And as a little 7-year-old, I was crushed. Like, what? And I could see some of the major stars were like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, this is a tough business. So if you guys are going to stay in Hollywood working, you're probably going to have to find something else to do. And I was unabashed. I was like, so I raised my hand. He's, Connor. I'm like, then why are you here? And everybody laughed. And he's like, that's a good question. Why am I here? Let's see. I'm a writer. I'm a director. I'm a producer. Oh, do you see these sets? I helped build those sets. I helped design them. I've helped write the stories. Oh, and by the way, I'm also an actor. That's why I'm here. I really love the camera guy, which was cool. They put me up there in the crane with him, and I was on his Panavision JL Fisher dolly, whatever it was, and learning how they load the Panavision film. And he was just saying that there's other things to do in the business that'll keep you in the business, and you don't have to worry about all this other stuff. So at the end of the day, he was getting ready to take off, and as he passed me, he messed up my hair and says, you like to talk a lot, don't you, Connor? And I'm like, yeah. And I think you ought to go into voiceover. And so I told my agent about it, and that's not a bad idea, because when you get about 12 or so and a little bit awkward stage, we need to find a transition for you. And so I owe what I do as voiceover to Michael Landon. Even though I'd done voiceover, I was thinking my career is going to be forever on camera. He helped me reshape and refocus what I was looking towards, because I think he's been around actors his whole life, so he could tell when your heart's not in it or whatever. I was just going through the motions, and the excitement as a child, as a 7-year-old can be, as what my dad thought was a hobby. But I really hadn't thought of it as a career. I couldn't even figure out if we'd go into town, and if they were talking about Little House on the Prairie, and someone would recognize me or something from a commercial or for even Little House, I would always ask my mom, how do they know this? They weren't there when we were doing this. And so my mom's explaining, so you like the $6 million man? I'm like, yeah. But you're not there when he's filming, are you? No. How do you know he's on television? You see him. I just couldn't get that. In other words, it's a good thing I wasn't a brain surgeon.
Well, I love the diversification. You knew that not everybody was going to be a A-list star celebrity. The whole idea of Hollywood is made up not just the Brad Pitt or the Angelina Jolie. It's the team. It's the grafters. It's the boom mic. It's the film director. It's the camera guy. It's Mike. The sound effects. There's so many people that play parts in that movie that we enjoy. But typically we are always like, oh, did you see Brad Pitt? And we know those movies because of an actor. I love to remind us that it's all these different people that make movies that shape our generations. Like you had mentioned before, I think, Anthony, you had said that the TV shows became American icons, but they shaped a generation. You can almost tell if you're a baby boomer because your favorite show was All in the Family or MASH, or versus some of the older.
What I find intriguing is the popularity that these shows still enjoy, because my dad has passed away. Here I am still getting residual checks for his shows, 60 years old. And I have a lot of people telling me in this fast-paced world we live in, they like watching Andy Griffith because it calms them down. It reminds them of a simpler time.
Nostalgic.
Yeah, they get nostalgic and happy days with, what is Henry Winkler? I saw a feature on him recently, and he goes into a deli, and everyone immediately says, hey, it's the Fonz. So
I always thought of TV as teaches us lessons of the times. Whatever big issues are going on while that's airing is something that typically TV shows try to tackle in some way.
yeah,
And really does become part of the fabric of who we are as a nation and as a people.
my dad worked with Norman Lear on some shows, and he was known for changing the social climate with All in the Family, with Good Times. So yeah, I think you're spot on with that observation.
Absolutely.
I'm totally excited to be a part of this. And I think we're going to have some really great episodes going forward. Anybody want to close this out with some good remarks?
Yeah, I'm excited too, because like I said earlier, I think we have something for everyone. There are a lot of people who want to get into this business, particularly voiceover seems to be intriguing to people because I can sit at home and record. So I think we can be a big help to people. And Connor and I have talked about this. There is not a more difficult business than voiceover or on camera acting or news. It's not as difficult because it's difficult to get jobs, but once you get a job in news, it's like an everyday job. But with what we do, you can audition 100 times and not book one thing. So your every day is like a new job. So I think we're going to be able to help people along and teach them the realities of what it really does take to get in this. And then I'm open to answering questions about, like I said, my dad's shows, but people like Charlie Sheen, Rob Lowe, and I know we're going to try to have guests on too. So I think it's going to be a great mixture.
Connor,
Yes.
my friend, I've been able to get to know over these last several months. And I'll tell you, we've worked together on other, episodes, but nothing like what we're doing now, which is really a culmination of what we were talking about. So I'm really excited that we're headed down this road, and there's so much to share. There's so many lessons to be learned. There's so much insight to be gained. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And people are going to recognize your work, especially because you've been in so much that we've heard, but we just don't have that face to tie it to. But at least we have an avatar this time, right?
Yeah, you've got that. Yeah. But I think, and you've told me many times, and you've also told Anthony and I together, that there is a lot of interest in our lives. It's something that he and I have taken for granted just because of the way we were raised. And we had great parents, and they knew how to raise families. And in my family, it was taking care of the family first. And it just so happens this is what we do. But in addition to that, it's like being raised in this kind of special type of frame is unique. And yeah, we've been exposed to a lot, so much more, so much of Americana and entertainment, television and radio and cartoons and news. And so I look at this as like a diamond or a gemstone, and there's multi-facets that we could talk about. Actually, we're pulling the curtain back so that you can see the man behind the curtain and find out that it's just a normal guy. The people we've met and worked with are just normal people. And I think that we're so excited. I'm like Anthony as well. It's like being able to address questions that people might have about different aspects of Anthony's life or my life, or how to get into career in broadcasting or news or voiceover. There's so many myths, and I just daily, and again, we talk about this with Anthony, about so many myths that are perpetuated about how easy it is to make seven figures and how easy it is to break into this or that. And it's not that way. I'm not saying that it's a horrible way to make a living, because I am doing it. I love it. But there's a lot of things to know about all the hats that you have to wear being in the business of entertainment. I remember as a child, one particular day, I didn't want to go do a commercial that I was supposed to go do, probably 7 or 8 years old. And I was just telling my agent, no, I don't want to go do whatever. I want to go play or whatever. And in the best way that she could, she was telling me that if I don't work, then there's a whole crew, a whole group of people that are not going to get paid. Those people make money because I'm going to go work. So you have your handlers and your agent and your account. If you don't, and that's just me on a small scale. I can imagine if someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Michael Jackson or someone on that level, so that then there's teams of people that are affected, because just like on Little House, if Michael Landon, it seemed like he worked 7 days a week and he'd work 15 hours a day probably. And if he didn't, then it would affect all. There's hundreds of people that would just not get paid because he decided not to show up to shoot the thing. And that goes back into the team thing with the news. And, behind every news broadcast, you have the producers and you have your editing team and your photojournalist. And there's just there's so many stories that we can share that I'm really looking forward to it. I'm like with you and Anthony. This is just the beginning.
Sounding great, guys. Until next time, Connor, Anthony, thanks for coming.